statements without clear commitment to implementation. And then a lot of time was spent on what I consider to be mundane issues which really do not add value to African development. But 50 years ago, the head of state gathered in Addis Ababa, the founding fathers of the African independence, led by Kwame Nkrumah, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Haile Selassie, Ahmed Sékou Touré, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, Modibo Keita, just to mention but a few, and founded the OAU, the Organization for African Unity. So Africa has come a long way in this past half century. Those 50 years ago, as I've said, OAU was founded. Now the OAU, when it was founded, set itself 3 objectives. 1, the decolonization of Africa, the ending of apartheid in South Africa, and the promotion of peace and security throughout the continent. We have successfully realized the first 2 of these objectives. Our founding fathers, with the OAU as one of their instruments, succeeded in placing the African liberation agenda at the center of the post-World War II global politics. The OAU inspired many in Africa to fight for independence and accelerated Africa's wind of change. South Africa finally became free. However, the realization of the 3rd objective, that is the universal peace and security on the continent, has remained a challenge. When you talk about peace and security, you're not just talking about physical peace, because peace is not merely the absence of war. We're talking about peace from hunger, peace from ignorance, and peace from general deprivation. This is what we talk about. So, ladies and gentlemen, OAU has come a long way from its beginnings on a liberation platform through its middle years as a regional integration agency to its present function and mandate under this newer name, which is the African Union. Its history and geopolitical context have defined the dynamism of both its mandate and mission, which it received in the context of bipolar global environment. The Cold War played a large part in defining the role of the OAU, the role that it would play in decolonization and in protecting the sovereignty of the newly independent African states. There were a number of challenges, chief among them that the OAU lacked the diplomatic and military capacity to deal with the Cold War generated and intra-African conflicts. It was faced with carving out for itself a respectable and strategically effective niche within the increasingly assertive non-aligned movement. It also had to grapple with the well-orchestrated undermining of Africa's progressive leadership by the Cold Warriors and the conservative Western establishments of the time. This determined the fates of Nkrumah, Ben Bella, Patrice Lumumba, and Thomas Sankara, among others. In the area of development policies, the Lagos Plan of Action for Economic Development of Africa, that is 1980 to 2000, stands out as a great achievement given its admirable attempt to provide African economies with a new and progressive development paradigm and an escape from the neocolonial development policy framework. This was made possible by the progressive agenda of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, which is based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Significant changes have since taken place in the global political arena. We have moved from the Cold War through a US-dominated world order to the ongoing shift towards multilateralism. This made necessary a strategic rethinking of the OAU's posture and architecture. Now, the former presidents who we credit with this new development are Thabo Mbeki of South Africa, Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria, Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia, and an international civil servant, Kingsley Amoaku of Ghana, who midwifed the AU from the OAU. They envisage a continent defined by peace, security, economic prosperity, and mutually beneficial engagement with the international community. So, ladies and gentlemen, against this background, allow me to share my vision of what Africa could and should look like in 50 years' time. I dream of a continent that will long have consigned poverty to history. It will have a youthful, skilled, and healthy population, and will serve as a granary, factory floor, and supplier to the world. It will be a continent that has made the 21st century its own, and whose key development indicators match the global standards. I believe that this vision is within our reach and that it is actually realizable. But it will be realized only if there is vigorous and sustained implementation of policy and institutional reforms, not mere rhetorics, grandstanding, chest thumping like what we saw recently in Addis Ababa. To help achieve this goal, the AU needs to be vigorous in guiding Africa to a new awakening across all indicators of human endeavor towards a continental democratic revolution. There must be a deliberate strategy to develop the continent's productive forces, ensuring inclusive economic growth and fostering an environment where the creative energy and synergy of Africa's peoples finds free rein. Indeed, our development trajectory will be conditional primarily on how we Africans manage our political, economic, and technological relations internally and internationally. This means that we must embrace all aspects of human rights, political, economic, social, environmental, and informational. Better governance of mineral revenues, higher agricultural prices, the demographic dividend, and the rapid urbanization represents opportunities for making the growth more inclusive and more effective in reducing poverty. Key drivers in this regard include: 1, quality leadership and citizen involvement, leading to capability and effectiveness in development. 2, the expansion of the formal democracy to include skillful management of social contradictions and the forging of social compacts to promote social inclusivity. 3, assured free, fair, and democratic multi-party elections. You have yet to achieve this goal, as demonstrated in Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Cote d'Ivoire recently, to mention but 3 examples. 4, the continental will to pool sovereignty in political and economic policy, not so much to develop an African government, but rather, as East Asia did, in synergic osmosis. 5, the development of strategic acumen to manage the changing economic power balances across the continent, which might otherwise lead to unhealthy competition and even conflict. In addition, non-state actors, such as private entrepreneurs, academics, researchers, and activists in the media and the arts should claim to be and be afforded space to support and nurture Pan-African revival. The recent move to exclude civil society actors from African Union events in Addis Ababa militate against such social inclusivity. Ladies and gentlemen, as we look forward to the next 50 years, it goes without saying that improved healthcare, physical security, quality education, food self-sufficiency, and food security are priorities for Africa. Our success in these areas will depend on developing new and creative ideas in line with the technological advances. It will depend on creating wealth from our abundant natural resources and on harnessing the human capital necessary to achieve our objectives. The development outcomes for the coming decades will be determined by various drivers of change, that is, the global, ideological, ecological, and human. The African Development Bank has said that continued rapid population growth will result in an absolute increase in Africa's working age population to about 1.87 billion by the year 2060. That's a huge population. Our success will depend largely on the quality of the policies that Africa evolves to take advantage of this vibrant young population. As has been said, young population can be a blessing, but can also be a curse. This human resource will need applicable knowledge and skills to propel the continent forward. We can therefore not gainsay the need to increase investment in education, training, and research. Looking at global forces, we see three major areas that will affect us deeply: the changing structure of the global trade, new trends in technology, and the international architecture governing trade, finance, and the development assistance. Over the past decade, the acronym BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has come to symbolize the growing power of the world's largest emerging economies and their potential impact on the global economic and increasingly the political order. The economic muscle of BRICS members makes it imperative for Africa to define its relationship with this bloc now and to place itself strategically to benefit from those countries, their thirst for resources, and markets for their goods and services. How Africa leverages and harnesses its natural resources and how it sets the terms of its relationship with global partners will help determine the path of change in the continent's favor. Because as I've always said, Africa is the richest continent in as far as resources are concerned. Unfortunately, the paradox is that it's also the poorest. This is what we must change. As far as the ecological drivers of change are concerned, Africa faces three in relation to its physical environment. First, climate change. Second, the continent's renewable and non-renewable natural resources. And third, the continent's endowment of land and water, which is coming under increasing pressure. Currently, 79% of Africa's arable land remains uncultivated. Sustainable management of these resources will make a huge difference in the next 5 decades. Two major human conditions that will drive change in Africa in the next 50 years are a delayed demographic transition and the burden of HIV/AIDS. The often cited demographic dividend of Africa could turn out to be a demographic disaster without the right kind of investment in its population. Already, African cities are the fastest growing in the world. By 2035, Africa's labor force will be larger than that of China. By 2050, more than a quarter of the world's labor force will be African. And by 2060, the continent is likely to be home to more than 15 megacities of more than 10 million inhabitants. Cities are centers of innovation, and such shifts could facilitate higher growth rates, or they could mean a larger and larger slums with unimaginable and unmanageable social tensions and conflicts, as seen recently in relation to the so-called Arab Spring. How individual economies in Africa will fare in meeting these challenges will depend on choices made individually and collectively. One thing that goes without saying is that Africa's development over the next 50 years must be determined by Africans, with the international community playing a supportive role in the form of improved performance on trade and investments. I've mentioned only relations with BRICS, but Africa must continue to trade with its traditional partners, and that is Western Europe and the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, as we mark our proud heritage, there are disturbing trends with the potential to harm these great granaries of opportunity for future generations. While there were flickers of hope in Somalia, brought about by the election of a president last year and the partial defeat of the Al-Shabaab, the lack of physical security in Africa is still a major risk. In the Great Lakes region, conflicts continue, pollinated by economic interests and misunderstandings, as well as subjective emotions. The situation in Mali and in the Sahel region is another cause for great concern, as are the political problems in Guinea-Bissau and the Central African Republic. How can the AU really celebrate 50 years when, for instance, some of our member states are sanctuaries for narcotics trade? How can it celebrate when women in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo live in perpetual fear of conflict and rape by armed thugs? To effect real change, the African Union must demonstrate commitment beyond the spoken word and genuinely work towards lifting the majority of Africans from the poverty trap. There is no need in an island surrounded by a sea of poverty and ignorance. There is no freedom. As long as this continues, political freedom faces an uncertain future. Above all, Africa must keep at the forefront of its mind and the need to pursue the interests and aspirations of Africans. It must rebuff external efforts to divide, dominate, and rule. And as I have said, how successful we shall be in the coming 50 years will depend primarily on the people of Africa themselves. I have said time and again that we have been responsible for our backwardness for the last 50 years, so that we should not continue to be talking about colonialism. That the founding fathers came up with a very noble idea of African unity. But then the structure that they inherited were quickly changed ideology which developed at that time was the traditional African society did not broker opposition. That in Africa, leaders met and resolved disputes through dialogue. Leopold Senghor called it palaver, dialogue, where people sat under a tree and resolved conflicts. Nkrumah argued very passionately about it. The same thing with Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. They said that the gigantic task of nation building required consolidation of efforts. And therefore, through a series of measures, coercion, blackmail, bribery, the opposition was led into extinction. And thereafter, we now developed the African strongman syndrome, the Monsieur le Président, Mr. President. So Mtukufu Rais, as we call them in Kenya, became now the norm. So the institution of the presidency became so powerful that it emasculated all other institutions of governance. And with that, with the disappearance of opposition, the checks and balances disappeared. Nepotism, tribalism, ethnicity, corruption became the order of the day. And that's a lot of resources were diverted to private pockets and hands, some of them finding their way into the bank accounts outside Africa. This is what is responsible for Africa's backwardness. That happened at the time of the Cold War, when there was a fight between the West and the East. So if you came to the West and said, I'm an ally in a war against communism, nobody cared how you ran your economy. You could be doing whatever you're doing, but you're an ally. That's how we tolerated Mobutu Sese Seko's of this world. He could kill his opponents the way he liked. Nobody cared. He would come to this country with a band of Franco. That is how we also tolerated Idi Amin Dada, the conqueror of British Empire. He could lynch millions of Ugandans, yet he was also appointed as the chairman of the Organization of African Unity. Jean Badel Bokassa of Central African Republic crowned himself the emperor of the Central African Republic, spending millions of dollars for his coronation. That's how he tolerated Kamuzu Banda of Malawi, the Ngwazi, who would say in a BBC interview that Chiume and Chipembere, who are his opponents, said that if they dare set foot in Malawi, there will be delicious meal for the crocodiles on the river Zambezi. But these were all tolerated. In the name of what? In the OAU? Non-interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state. That when Mwalimu Nyerere sent his troops to Uganda in retaliation to Amin's invasion of Tanzania and liberated Uganda, instead of him being celebrated and cheered, he was scorned at the OAU meeting in Monrovia. That is the OAU. Now we changed all that. Now we said AU should be an improvement on OAU. From non-interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state to non-indifference to the violation of human rights in any member country. But that is just said in words, not in action. We want to see this happening in action. So ladies and gentlemen, let me in conclusion quote Frantz Fanon. His challenge to humanity was that, and I quote, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it, unquote. Fulfilling that mission, ladies and gentlemen, must be an abiding moral precept for Africa. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
thank you very much for a delightful address. I really resonate to some of the things you said. If you will allow me to tell a personal story, my first foreign service assignment as a diplomat was in Uganda at the time of the Idi Amin coup, and very few of us like to remember that the Idi Amin coup was welcomed by the West, because it overthrew a leftward-leaning Milton Obote, who we all were very uncomfortable with. And Idi Amin, of course, went state visit and had tea with the Queen and all this stuff. We forget all of that now in retrospect, because he turned out to be such a bad guy. But we had blinders in those days for reasons that I won't elaborate on. Well, thank you very much, Your Excellency. That was a wonderful address. And as you know, the custom here at the Woodrow Wilson Center is to open to conversation with our audience. To remind the audience that we're being webcast live, so when I recognize you, please wait for a microphone to arrive and identify yourself so the Prime Minister will know who he's speaking to. With that, I throw the floor open. The first hand I saw was right at the back there. Yes. And then we'll come down here, Derek, to here and here.
Hello, sir. My name is Jill Craig. I'm with Voice of America's South Sudan in Focus program. And I just had a question. You mentioned a lot of the countries that have obvious problems, like Somalia, Mali, countries in conflict or recovering. And I'm just wondering, regarding your neighbor to the north, South Sudan, does your Afro-optimism still stand true there as well, given the fact that we've got a lot of issues with oil right now, we've got a lot of conflict in some areas, and I just want to get your take on that. Thank you.
Again, I think we'll take 2 or 3 questions before you respond, sir, if you're right. So, lady in the front, and then the gentleman right back there.
Judy Mayotte, and I guess I would identify myself with the Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation for this conference. Thank you very much for being here. I wonder what you feel has been the effectiveness of the Kenya Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission. And then secondly, the whole issue of water, thinking particularly right now of the dam that's being built in Ethiopia and how that's going to affect the Nile and the peoples there, and water across Africa, I think will be a huge, have a huge impact on the continent in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question this round.
I want to begin by thanking the Honorable Raila for the great speech. My name is Banald Chibirige. I come from Uganda, which is just next to Kenya. My first question is, in your observation, Honorable Raila, what do you see as the role of international law in ensuring peace and justice in Africa? Then second question, over the last 10 years, we've seen a massive and uncontrolled migration of the Chinese people, especially into sub-Saharan Africa. What benchmarks has Africa put in place to address that? Or what would you advise Africa should do? Because there's great fear among the African people that the Chinese actually are going to exploit the African resources to their advantage. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Banalt. Okay, I think we'll break there and allow you to answer. That's quite a wide-ranging group of questions, so that could take you a while. And I'll remind our audience, too, when I recognize you for a question, make it a question. That's one. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, one is the South Sudan. As you know, that South Sudan is a relatively new state. And but it has had a lot of problems in settling down, particularly because of the issues with the north. For quite some time now, the pipes had been shut by the north, and they were not able to export their oil to their export destinations. This has taken, it's a long time. We have been involved, I myself been involved in trying to negotiate to allow this oil to flow. Initially, it was about the amount that was supposed to be charged for pumping this oil, which was actually, I mean, what the North was demanding was extortionate, to say the least. Ultimately, arrangement was agreed, and oil started flowing earlier this year. Unfortunately, again, Mr. Bashir has ordered the closing of those type of taps again, making allegations that the the South is supporting another group in the North, that is SPLA North, because the South has said nothing could be further from the truth. We do hope that a solution will be found, a peaceful solution of this. We also want to see that the issue of border disputes is resolved, that the CPA, which was signed in Nairobi in 2005, is fully implemented. This, in my view, is what will guarantee proper peace in the South. There will always be, of course, in these kind of situations, internal disputes and contradictions. This is normal in any society, the South not being an exception. Number 2 was about the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission report, which was just released early this year. Early this month. As you know, that this report was actually ready sometimes last year, but the regime of which I was a member was not ready to receive it. It was said that it would interfere with other people's fortunes or prospects in their election. That's why it was pushed into after the elections. Ultimately, it was now presented, but of course, what has now emerged was that some chapters had to be revised, and that some commissioners, particularly international commissioners, disagreed with the revision of certain chapters, and they have since recorded a dissenting view with regard to those chapters. With that as it may, the TGRC report is a thick document. It deals with historical injustices dating back from independence in 1963 to 2008. And it demands that the government should apologize to the people, and then also ensure that this report is implemented. We've asked that this report should be published and then presented to Parliament for debate, and that Parliament should be the one that appoints an implementation commission to ensure that it is fully implemented. This is coming out against the background of the fact that the British government this last week apologized publicly to the victims of torture during the Mau Mau War of Liberation, and offered reparation to the tune of 20 million sterling pounds. Our view is not the amount that is important, but the fact that the British government has had the decency to come out publicly and say, we apologize, we are sorry. We say that this actually is an indication of a government that is ready to solve these disputes in a civilized manner. And we are saying, if the British government can do it 50 years after independence, why shouldn't an independent government do it? So we are actually demanding that this government should do exactly the same, following the footsteps of the British government. The dams that Ethiopia is constructing, you see, some are on the Blue Nile and others are on the Omo River. As Kenya, we are more concerned with the dams on the Omo River because these are the ones which will have a serious ecological impact on Lake Turkana area. Already, as you know, that the waters of Lake Turkana have been receding, but this, of course, is saying as the construction of the dams are going on and diversion of waters to fill the dams, but that eventually there will be a flow Because there have been environmental impact assessment studies undertaken, which could show that, yes, we are going to be adversely affected to a certain extent. And negotiations are still ongoing between the government of Kenya and the government of Ethiopia. Okay. Then Mr. Shibirigi, and about the international law and peace in Africa. Yes, the international community, of course, has a responsibility. But I say the primary responsibility first and foremost lies and rests with the AU, the African Union, which should be the organization that is at the forefront of dealing with conflicts and disputes on the continent. There have been a tendency to blame the international community, for example, meddling in African affairs. One example is the French in Cote d'Ivoire and the French now in Mali. But I'm saying that these people are coming at the invitation of the African Union, because there's also been the issue of Libya, which has also been a subject of debate. In the case of Cote d'Ivoire, I was involved in the Cote d'Ivoire. I was appointed by the AU as a mediator. I teamed up with a team which had been appointed by ECOWAS on the Cote d'Ivoire crisis. Now we reached a stage where we made a recommendation that there's a need for a military intervention in the conflict. The ECOWAS was not able to send a team. So Nigeria, being the biggest player at that time, was facing an election. And President Jonathan told us that they were not able to send troops at that time because it would be used by these opponents in the election campaign against him. The situation was precarious. And the French were given a nod through the back door to assist. And the French assisted in actually removing an illegitimate regime and putting back into power a regime which, a party which had actually won the elections genuinely. So in my view, that was a very positive intervention which needed to be celebrated rather than condemned by Africans. Equally, like in Libya, the AU did not act when it was supposed to have acted. The AU should have been the one which should have moved in and then invited other international players if they did not have the capacity to deal with the issue, because people were dying in Libya. So sometimes we tend to stress sovereignty too far, that, oh, why did these powers come to Africa? But then what was the alternative? When bombs were being used against innocent, defenseless civilian population in Libya. Likewise, the less said about the Mali situation, the better. So, about the Chinese in Africa, China has got interests. Every country acts in its strategic self-interest. The Chinese are coming to Africa to trade, and a number of them are involved even in petty trade, which can be done by Africans. I think that it is the governments in Africa which should define their relationship with China, because China is, of course, interested in a number of things in Africa. They're interested in African raw materials and so on. But it is up to African countries to define how they relate with China, not to Chinese to tell you how to relate with them. You see, Africa needs technology. Africa needs to develop its infrastructure. China is ready to come and help develop infrastructure, but it must not be at China's terms. It should be at Africa's terms, that you will do this in exchange for this and that, because they are also interested in African raw materials. I'm saying that those raw materials are of no use to Africa unless they are exploited and used for development. I mean, the bauxite is of no use to Guinea when it is underground, or copper, the Congo, or Zambia, and so on. So these are only strategic raw materials that are only useful if they are exploited for the benefit of the country. So you need to use them to trade. You can insist that, look, we're not going to export the ore, raw ore, or raw copper, and so on. We want value addition. So we want a steel plant here in country X or country Y, country Z, okay? But we're not going to import retailers. People are coming with textiles and so on to come and sell here, because we also have got abundant labor force in our own country, which is able to do all these other petty trades in our country. So in my view, I don't think we should blame the Chinese. Blame those people who are allowing those petty traders to come and trade in Africa. Okay, that will be my position on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got some questions from our overflow room, which I'll draw from this round, and then we'll come back to the audience in front of us. The first one comes from Peter Odhiambo, who's a Kenyan citizen living here, and these are all about Kenya. They're Kenya specific. What do you think is the solution to the narcotics drug trade that has begun in Kenya, in East Africa? And then we have one from Federico Maria, who asks, and I assume this is based on what you'd said about presidential systems being too strong in Africa. Is there going to be any attempt to move the current constitution in Kenya to be a parliamentary system instead of a presidential system? And then from Amira Woods with the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington, D.C., she asks about, with the new oil discoveries in Kenya, what mechanisms of accountability are there going to be to help Kenya avoid the resource curse of oil in Africa? So we take on those three questions.
Fine. Narcotics trade in Kenya. Kenya is just one of the routes, but it's not an issue that is confined to Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
It's an international issue, and you cannot really just fight it within your own national boundaries or territory. There must be collaboration, international collaboration, to deal with this narcotics trade generally. Kenya has been a transit for some time, and the security forces have been actually dealing with this. As you know, that a number of traffickers have been arrested and have been prosecuted. Some have been deported. Even just 10 days ago, some were deported from the country. So we have all the times offered cooperation in this area, because this is something that is very destructive to an economy. Young people who would otherwise be productively engaged, their lives are completely destroyed. In areas like in the coastal part of Kenya, this issue is particularly very serious and acute. So we will continue to cooperate with international authorities in fighting against narcotics trade. The presidential system, this is a system of government. And I think this is a debate that needs to be engaged on continentally, on the continent of Africa, because in a number of African countries, issue ethnicity is a serious issue. and most of these countries adopted presidential systems, as I was talking about. And the presidency became too powerful because of amendment to the constitution. We ended up with single-party systems or military dictatorships. But you had this Monsieur le Président, Mr. President syndrome. Then the president, most of the times, surrounded himself with an elite, generally from his own ethnic community, because most Africans have different tribes. And that's what enhanced ethnic competition. So that when we emerge from the single-party dictatorship to multi-party systems and introduce competition into the electoral system, people's mind still associate security with their own. That they are not secure unless they have their own in State House.
Mm.
So the presidential elections become ethnic competitions. When somebody becomes a presidential candidate, he's seen as the flag bearer of that communities in that race, and that it will therefore attract ethnic voting in the elections. So whereas presidential elections is good for a country like the US, which is fairly cohesive society, young, fragile societies, it enhances ethnic competition. And that's the reason why the proposal which I'm making is that we need to look at the parliamentary system of elections, where parties will be competing, not individuals. The people who vote for members of parliament, and then the party that wins the majority of seats in the House then forms a government. That way, even somebody from a small community can become a leader of the country. The way things are right now, first you'll be asked, how many votes are you bringing on the table that you can be a presidential candidate? If you come from a very small community, you'll be told you are not sell. There are no votes you're bringing to the table. So we say that this is something that needs to be looked at properly for African democracy to work properly. And secondly, parliamentary systems are also more accountable, because you have got a government in the House. The Prime Minister can be held to account, can be made to answer questions directly there and then in the House. In a presidential system, of course, is different. It works well with a system that has been so entrenched and tried over the years, like here in the United States. But in others, no. Mr. President will be somewhere, you will not be able to reach him, and also his cronies will come to answer questions in the House which they do not believe. So we think that it's an issue that needs to be put on the table and debated in the continent generally. And you see, if you look at Europe, most of those democracies are parliamentary. Britain, Germany, Scandinavian countries, Israel, Japan, India, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, mainly parliamentary systems. So it's something that needs to be looked at by many African countries. Oil in Kenya, yes. They have found oil in Kenya, in Uganda also, as you know, a number of these. But it's the issue of how you deal with oil. As experience has shown in many countries, in some countries, oil can either be a blessing or a curse. You've seen countries where there's oil revenues, but most of that revenue does not benefit the economy of the country. The people themselves are just very poor. most of that revenue is shared between the multinationals and a few individuals in the country. But we've also seen countries where oil revenue is being used to the benefit of the economy and the people of that country. So it means that you must put a proper legal framework in place that will ensure a proper exploitation and utilization of the oil wealth for the benefit of the country. And this is, I think, what Kenya is trying to do. But as you know that oil is finite, it's not something that is unlimited. New sources of energy are being found. As you can see that this country, which used to be the biggest consumer of oil, is shortly going to be one of the biggest exporter of oil. So maybe we're discovering oil at the time when the importance of oil is beginning to diminish. So we should not just be standing up there and celebrating we have discovered oil. We need to look at other areas of developing our country.
Okay. Okay, let's take a round of questions now from the House again. I see one right here, and one back there on the aisle, and then one right down here in the middle. We'll take those three. This one first, yes.
I'm Robert Gribbett. I'm a former U.S. ambassador, but I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Central Nyanza many years ago. Mr. Miwa, my question has to do with the gap between rich and poor. It's very great in Africa, particularly in countries like Angola and Nigeria. Yet Kenya has managed to create a middle class. What are the reasons for Kenya's success in that regard?
Okay, thank you very much. And then the one on the aisle there, yes. Mm-hmm.
Hello, hi sir. My name is Nyaka Lagoke. I'm from the Ivory Coast. And I just listened to your point on the crisis in Ivory Coast. And it looks like you haven't done your homework on the situation in the country. And then in your view, the things, it was supposed to, the international community was to go and remove an illegitimate government, to use your word. And I know that in your country, when there was a crisis, electoral crisis, you asked for a recount. Maybe in the case of Ivory Coast, if the recount was done, and then if it was proved that Gbagbo has truly lost the election, as there was a gap in the turnout during the second round, the international community announced 81%, while facts proved that it was around 70% during the second round. And I would like you to comment on that. So while you asked a recount in your country, and in the case of Ivory Coast, and you were supporting a military intervention that killed innocent, and there were more than 1,000 people killed by Alassane Ouattara's people in the western part of the country before Gbagbo was being removed from the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And right here, Mahdi.
Thank you so much, Mheshimiwa. My name is Timothy Kaberia. I'm from Kenya. And I know you're speaking about Africa as a whole, but I have a question that is specific to Kenya. For the last few weeks, basically you've been representing Kenya, not really representing Kenya, but you've talked about various issues in different parts of the world, and we have you here today. When some of us look at you, we don't look at you as just Raila Odinga, but we're looking at you as basically you represent us. And to a big extent, there was some talk about the government wanting you to be a special envoy, and there was talk back and forth. Now they argue that the Treasury yesterday said that they are requesting for some money for the former Prime Minister's travel. And do you see yourself taking up the special envoy challenge? And is it a paradox that actually you're doing that right now? It's like, except you're not on the payroll. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Timothy. Very interesting question. Okay, Mr. Dick.
Well, first, the gentleman who said he was ambassador and was also Peace Corps. That is something that you share with Ambassador
course,
Johnny
yes.
Carson here. He was also a Peace Corps
And they know each other well.
in Nyanza. Well, yes, it is true that Kenya is one of those few countries which have developed a middle class. And I believe very strongly that a vibrant middle class is a sine qua non to economic growth and development. That you need to target and develop a middle class in our country. And our starting point was not different from others. But how it happened was immediately after independence, the government first created a number of state corporations, first to allow the people's participation in the economy, because the colonial regime had monopolized most economic activities among the foreign population and so on. So, but then at that time, our people did not have capital, nor did they have the experience. So there was therefore a state intervention. We started with what we called a mixed economy by creating several state corporations. But we also came up with a policy she called Africanization policy. This Africanization was like affirmative action. Like in South Africa, they call it the black empowerment, to support people to get involved in private sector through access to capital, credit facilities, and so on. We started corporations like Industrial and Commercial Development Corporation, ICDC. And then we also started Kenya National Trading Corporation. These were sources of capital to enable people to venture into private sector. But then it was said that Africanization was discriminatory. It was discriminating against other people, non-Africans. So it was then changed from Africanization to Kenyanization. Kenyanization. I think with the retrospect, with the hindsight, I think these were positive moves which helped to the growth of to facilitate the growth of a middle class in our country. So we have a nucleus, a middle class, but it needs to grow. And I've said that this is the challenge that we have. In fact, in our own manifesto in my party, when we were campaigning, we said that we wanted to create more opportunities to enable our people to participate much more actively, not in the economy, not only within the country, but regionally and continentally. Right now, we have got Kenyan companies which are active in the region, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Zambia, in South Africa, and so on. So they're beginning to become continental actors. Ultimately, we hope to have multinational corporations which are indigenous Kenyans also operating in this country. Those are the kind of ideas that we have. So that instead of just having Coca-Cola and General Motors and so on in Kenya, we also have some of our own corporations operating in this country. Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire, let me first begin by saying I don't share your views. You may be Ivorian, yes, but you need to know that I spent quite some time in Ivory Coast, and I talked to quite a number of people in Ivory Coast when I came at that time. I had lengthy discussions with Mr. Bagbo. I also had a long discussions with Mr. Ouattara. At that time, Mr. Ouattara and his team were more or less marooned in Hotel du Golf there. And Mr. Bagbo, of course, was demanding a recount. But you'll remember, because he said the court had ruled that he was the winner. But then there was an electoral commission which had been set up jointly. That electoral commission had actually made an announcement and said that the Bagbo lost. When the chairman was in the process of announcing the results, one of the Bagbo's members in the commission actually took the paper from his hand. It was shown internationally. Everybody saw it, the whole world, when this fellow was removing. The chairman had to be whisked away to go and make announcement elsewhere. Mr. Bagbo, of course, then went to his own court, and the court then declared him the winner. And now he was demanding that there should be a recount of the votes. I talked to Mr. Bagbo. I told him, Bagbo, you know, I won the elections in Kenya. Everybody knows that. But I'm not the president. I'm a prime minister. So I told Mr. Bagbo, I was told that I should go to the court and that we should go for a recount. But I said, we refused to have a recount. Why? Because the ballot papers had been in the custody of my opponent all the time. In this case, the ballot papers which Bagbo wanted to be recounted had been in the custody of his own people for a long time. So even if they were recounted and found that Bagbo won, nobody would have believed it. No, it was an exercise in futility. It would not have helped anybody. I said, look, the country is bigger than you. And that's why I have accepted, because the stage where we are, people are dying. And more people are going to continue to die in this country if you persist this way. The easier option is for you to agree to accept the results as announced by the Electoral Commission, and then we negotiate a way out. One was that he would be given a complete guarantee that he would not be persecuted. He could retire in the country. If he wanted to go out of the country, he could also go and live in exile and let the government then move on. He was demanding what they call the Kenyan solution, that we form a grand coalition government, like Mugabe had also insisted before him. I told him the Kenyan solution is not a solution. People go to an election so that leaders can be elected. But then the election is not an end of it, the day. Even right now, I am not satisfied with the elections last time, because I still believe that I won the elections. But this time around, because we had a judiciary, I went to the court. And then the court ruled that I did not win. And they refused to have a runoff. And then I came up and told the people, I accept the verdict of the court. I may not agree with it, but I accept it in the interest of peace in the country. So you see, democracy is not an instant coffee which you brew and drink at the same time. It's a process. So if I had refused to accept, many more people would have died. There would have been a bloodshed in the country. That's why let our people begin to accept that the country is larger than an individual. That even if they have been unfair to you, look at it as a process. You still have another time, another chance later on. So in my view, if Bagbo had accepted what I had proposed to him, many lives in Cote d'Ivoire would have been saved. And that would not have stopped him from running even this coming time again. As it were, He ended up in The Hague, unfortunately. I've been saying, inordinate time was spent at Addis Ababa talking about ICC. ICC is targeting African leaders. And I said, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be more hypocritical. Gbagbo was sent to ICC by the government of Cote d'Ivoire. Taylor had been given asylum in Nigeria. When they wanted to send him to ICC, he escaped. They arrested him, put him on a plane, sent him to ICC. Bemba is there because of Kabila. 2 months ago, President Kagame put General Nkunda on a plane and sent him to ICC, to Hague. Museveni, who was so vocal in Addis Ababa, asked FBI to look for Mr. Kony and send him to The Hague. Even us in Kenya, we refused to set up a local tribunal to try the suspect of post-election violence and said, we want them to go to Hague. We even sang in Parliament, don't be vague, let's go to The Hague. So how then do you begin to accuse The Hague of racism that is targeting African leaders? General al-Bashir is known for sending his troops, his Janjaweed, to go and kill innocent women and children in Darfur. Now in Addis Ababa, they were saying Bashir is innocent. How more hypocritical can you be as Africans? Let us be serious. Kaberia, on the special envoy role. I'm very busy as I am right now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You may have just eliminated that role anyway just now. We have time for just one more round of questions, and we're going to start with